Mannadium has been seeing a surprising amount of success post Age of Overlord, and in today's video, I'm going to be doing a deck profile on my updated Mannadium deck post Age of Overlord. And I built this deck in order to be able to beat those meta threats and just be able to match up the best into all the different decks out there in this very diverse format right now. Because I think one of the greatest strengths of Mannadium is that it doesn't really have any bad matchups, and you can tune its flex spots to be able to cover a variety of matchups, which I really like. But without any further ado, let's just hop straight into the deck profile. Starting off with the Mannadium engine, we're playing 3 copies of Riemhart, it's your best starter, 1 copy of Rhoda to search the Riemhart, or Rykart. I just like the flexibility of Rhoda because these are your best starters. Riemhart is now a 1-card combo with the new Mannadium cards post Age of Overlord, so you do definitely want to see it. 3 copies of Meek, these are the only tuners I think that are necessary right now. You can make an argument for Torrid because you can special it with any of your 1521s and use that as an extender to go into Trisukta, but I just feel like Torrid isn't that good and just not that necessary at the moment. And I wanted to use that space to play other non-engine cards instead, so that's why we're only playing 3 copies of Meek. And then 3 copies of Visa Starfrost. So a lot of people have been cutting this down to 2 if they're playing Visa Samsara, but I'm actually not playing Visa Samsara in this deck. The reason I'm not playing Samsara is because Samsara actually doesn't do that much on its own. Strictly as a 1-card combo, all it can do is pull off an OTK. Going first in terms of your combo potential with it, it doesn't do anything other than make a rank 4 if you're not playing all those like crazy bricks like Mathmex or whatever. So that's why I decided to just up the number of Visa Starfrost instead, because Visa Starfrost alone actually does do something. If you're able to get Visa Starfrost out onto the board, even by like popping a hand trap, for example, you can still actually make plays, whereas with Samsara you can't. And while I do personally like Samsara as a card, I just feel that in this format, there are a lot of cards that can make it so Samsara is trapped in your hand, for example. So like, let's say you're doing your combo, you're trying to get Visas into the graveyard. A good opponent who knows how the deck works is not going to let you get Visas into rotation. And then that Samsara is just going to be sitting in your hand and it's going to be dead for the rest of the turn. So that's why I just decided not to play Samsara and just max out on the number of Visa Starfrost instead. Next up, for the rest of the Mannadium engine, 3 copies of Clarium. Pretty standard. This is a pretty good field spell. Unfortunately, since we are playing hand traps, the boosting effect does make it so sometimes your combos can be a little awkward if you don't have that many combo cards, but still a very great card. 2 copies of Obsidian. I think 2 copies is becoming the new norm now, especially with cards like Droll running around a lot more. I feel like 2 is absolutely sufficient. You can make an argument for 3, but I just wanted to use that extra space to play a card like Imaginace instead. I like the utility that Imaginace can give you when going first. You have the option to search this or Obsidian. Imaginace can be great if you have a lot of engine already. You can use it to draw into hand traps once your combo's over, to see more non-engine to strengthen your board while putting away redundant engine pieces. It's a very easy side out alongside 1 copy of Obsidian post game 1. However, because people are putting in Droll against your deck, and these cards aren't the greatest into Droll, but game 1 they can be pretty solid, so that's why I'm deciding to play them. And then finally, just 1 copy of Reframing for the Mannadium engine. I used to play Realm Eulogy. I do think Realm Eulogy is a good card going second, but going first, you never really want to use it, considering all the monsters on your board are pretty solid to keep. So like your level 10 Synchros or SP Little Knight, you never want to destroy them with Eulogy. You'd rather have Reframing in those situations. Yes, Reframing sucks to draw going second, but that's sort of a concession you have to make, because Reframing also offers you the utility of helping protect yourself against a card like Typhon, since if they go Typhon, they can only beat over SP Little Knight, and then if they try to use the effect, you can just negate and destroy it with Reframing, and then from there your board is just safe. So Reframing, I think, is pretty important for that. Next up, for the Scareclaw engine, we're playing 2 copies of Reichphobia. I think 2 is pretty standard because I am playing 2 copies of Scareclaw Lightheart. You just want to search 1 for the follow-up, which is good. 3 copies of Scareclaw Rykart. I really do like Rykart as a card since it actually does do stuff on its own, more than Samsara does at least. And I think that Rykart is incredibly important in this deck because you do want to see as many 1521s as possible. If you see this in combination with like the Mannadium Meek plus Visa Starfrost, you can start playing cards like Dimensional Barrier, Dimension Shifter, and cards like Droll and Lockbird. So I just wanted to max out on the 1521s. And then 2 copies of Scareclaw Rival. I don't really love this card, but I do think you need 2 now because It makes it so if you draw one, it's not a brick. You have the free search in the deck still for this Scareclaw right card, since you're going through it every single time you do your combo. But also, just being able to search one for follow-up is super important. Like, the boards you're making are no longer like, oh, super unbreakable, your opponent's not going to be able to play a single card at all. More likely than not, you're going to come across situations where you get hand trapped, you put up a half board, but as long as you have follow-up with like the Phobia, you can search right card the next turn, normal summon it, grab Arrival, and then just keep going with your plays from there. So I think that double Arrival is important for that reason. It's also not once per turn, so that's nice. And then for the supplementary engine, just 3 copies of Fenrir. Pretty standard at this point. Fenrir is incredibly strong when going first or going second, and it adds you the engine piece, Scareclaw Castira. So while Scareclaw Castira does unfortunately suck to draw, it's not always 100% dead, because there are times where you are going to hard draw the rest of your Scareclaw engine, like Arrival or Reichardt, so it's not that bad, but this engine is just incredibly strong. I really wouldn't consider replacing it with Prisma, at least not for now. And then for the non-engine slots, there are 12. Like I mentioned at the start of this video, I built this deck for the Age of Overlord meta specifically when I was recording this video, so it may be subject to change in the future, but I felt that right now the best way to go is with hand traps as opposed to board breakers. Because of the prevalence of a deck like Rescue Ace, you want to stop them from setting forward, because your standard board breakers like Droplets and Econ aren't going to be able to do too much to actually break their board, so you want to be able to stop them instead. So we're going to play 3 copies of Ash Blossom, 3 copies of Effect Veiler. This is just the most generic hand trap out there. It does hit Rescue Ace Turbulence, which is super important, but another added benefit is it hits those blowout normal summons like Neospatian Connector or Jen the Diamond Tiger. Those are incredibly important to stop, because if those resolve, those can essentially just be an FDK against you, and you just want to be able to prevent your opponent from doing that. You can make an argument for Mourner here. Mourner does have synergy with the Castira engine since it's level 3, but I didn't like Mourner because it can't stop those key normal summons, and also it's a hard once per turn. Plus, with the ruling in the TCG that your Mourner is Chainlink 1 on your turn, it's just not really that great in terms of stopping cards on your turn either, which is why I just felt that Veiler would be better in this situation. Next, I'm playing 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird. I decided to main Droll Lockbird over Nibiru. I thought Droll would hit a higher number of decks than Nibiru would. Nibiru, I think, in my opinion at least, is only super good against like the random like rogue decks and Unchained, but Droll and Lockbird can potentially hit a lot of the top meta decks as well, and even a deck like Rescue Ace can sort of cap their combos so they're not able to go off that hard, whereas a card like Nibiru rarely is going to be able to do that against Rescue Ace. And then finally 3 copies of Imperm. So similar reasoning as Veiler, except Imperm is just more of a staple, can be used going second when you draw it as your 6th card as well. 40 cards in the main deck. There's nothing else I'd really want to change. I will mention I'm not playing Primeval Planet Pearl Rhino. I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think it warrants a slot in the main deck, because the only time it comes up is when your only playable card is Calarium. But I just figured in those cases you sort of just have to accept that your combo is going to have to be a lot worse, or you're going to have to set up something just like an SP pass or whatever. It's a lot better to just save the main deck space and not play it at all, because I really don't see other times where it's going to come up, especially because I don't play Terraforming and Thrust as well. Moving on to the extra deck, we're playing 1 copy of Trisukta. You're not going to make it every single game, but the times it does come up, it's super clutch. Helps you play through a lot of awkward situations as well. 1 copy of Amritar, you're able to make this more often now with Trisukta. In fact, it's pretty much the only thing you can make off Trisukta aside from Lynx, and Amritars are super important for your combo, of course. I'm still playing the Excel Synchro Stardust Dragon. I think this is very important still. There are going to be hands where you don't have as many extenders. This can turn into a Bestial Dispatter on its own, which is very important as well. Or it can just be used to climb into a Synchro 10 like Baron when you only have like a level 4 plus level 4, for example. And I think it just comes up enough to where it's warranted space in the extra deck. And then speaking of Dispatter, playing the Dispatter Crimson Dragon to go alongside it. No target from Crimson Dragon to search, you don't need it, it's just a brick. It doesn't really add anything to your end board. We're not playing Calamities either. I still don't think that combo is very good. And then for the other Synchro 10s, 1 Baron, of course, just the staple Synchro 10. And then finally, 1 copy of Changying. So I wasn't playing Changying in my previous builds, but I feel that Changying is incredibly important now. I was deciding between this or Appaloosa, and I went with Changying in the end for a couple of reasons. One, Changying isn't a super polyable card, so when you end with boards like Baron, Changying, and Dispatter, like This is incredibly strong because your opponent has to be playing the Draco Quist Super Poly target specifically, and not every deck can play that. Like, very few decks can play it. But on the other hand, a lot of decks can play Mudragon in the Swamp. So if this was Appaloosa, for example, you just lose out your Baron and the Appaloosa to that, and that's just huge because Baron's just a key part of your end board. Not to mention, Cheng Ying has an incredibly important role in this deck as well, being able to out Borderland Dragon, because this deck actually folds the Borderland Dragon aside from Scareclaw Castira. So you want to have another out to that in your extra deck because it doesn't target, which is very important. But also, since we're main deck and reframing, you're going to be able to get its banishing effect off a lot more often. Plus, with SP Little Knight, you're also going to be able to consistently just resolve its effect to banish one from field or graveyard. It's just an incredibly strong card, and I really don't think I would go back to playing Appaloosa over it now, just because of how many synergies it has with the deck and with cards like Vicious Astrolabe and reframing. Speaking of Vicious Astrolabe, 2 copies of Vicious, I think this is all you need. You're going to be able to recycle it by banishing it with SP Little Knight. You can also do the play where you summon out a Cheng Ying and then Baron attempt to pop Cheng Ying. Cheng Ying protect itself by banishing Vicious Astrolabe. That's another way to get it into the banish zone for your dispatter to shuffle back. So double Vicious Astrolabe is sufficient. Moving on to the links, 2 copies of Lightheart. I think 2 is pretty important. You can make 2 in pretty much all of your combos to guarantee follow-up, which is huge with this deck, because like I mentioned before, your boards are not unbreakable, so having follow-up is very important. 1 copy of Cross Sheep, pretty standard at this point, has such great synergy with Vicious Astrolabe. SP Little Knight is the best link 2 in the game right now. You absolutely have to play it. It becomes a bigger part of your end board now since you're not playing Appaloosa, and if you're ending on a link, it's just going to be SP Little Knight. One caveat I will mention with this card though is just be wary of how you use it, because Typhon is a card, and a lot of the times if your board is just really weak, your opponent's just going to go Typhon, beat over this, bounce your one other like big synchro, and that broke your entire board. So just be wary of how you summon it and whether or not you really want it on your end board. And then to round out the extra deck, I am still playing Nightmare Unicorn and Axis Go Talker. I think these cards are incredibly important, not only because I'm citing a card like Dark to Dark Charmer, but also I think this just helps you OTK a lot easier. In theory, it's supposed to help you OTK through Dimensional Barrier, but even with the Dimensional Barrier not being as prevalent now, this just makes it so you can sort of play a little carelessly. You don't have to worry too much about your levels being right or having tuners and non-tuners for synchro monsters. You can just link them all into this, link climb into this with like Dark or Cross Sheep, spin a card, make access code after. You always get 2 pops because Cross Sheep's going to be in your graveyard plus a random Dark like Lightheart, and then you pop 2, attack for 5300, and if you have any other body on the board like Vicious Astrolabe, it's just enough for game. I will also mention before I end up the deck profile, I was citing a card like Baguska. You don't necessarily have to play it, but I do feel that there are 17 or 8 to 18 cards you could make an argument for playing in the extra deck. I cut down on Appaloosa, Baguska, and Dark, but I do end up citing the Dark and the Baguska, so I would still recommend considering citing extra deck cards in this deck just because of how critical those cards can be to the deck when going first or going second. And with all that being said, stay tuned for the replay of this deck coming up. I'll be playing against Rescue Ace, which is supposed to be the best deck of the format. So hopefully you guys are looking forward to that. But once again, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.